There's something I've never heard anyone say about the Star Wars sequels. For all the complaints about damaging the brand and betraying the characters, they also did something that was both less emotional and more profoundly harmful. Let me explain. People have said for years that Star Wars functioned as a modern myth. What exactly does that mean? The myths we're all familiar with, the fundamental stories that ancient civilizations told about themselves and their gods, sprang from the consciousness of entire peoples. They told tales about themselves and the forces governing their lives, and over time these were codified into the origin stories of their cultures. They formed how these people saw the world. When Star Wars was released in 1977, it hit like a meteor. Its popularity was immediate and overwhelming. But why? Part of the reason was indeed the unprecedented escapism it provided, the special effects, the lightning-fast editing, and what the American Film Institute voted the greatest American movie soundtrack of all time. But those were just elements. What held them together? This movie was an experience like no other. Why was that? I believe it was the way George Lucas conceived the story itself. He famously drew on the idea of the hero's journey, the archetypal quest that undergirds all myths, and he fused deeply powerful facets of contemporary culture into the story. Westerns, science fiction, war films, technological anxiety, totalitarian rule. Wrapping it all in a package so breathlessly exhilarating that audiences didn't consciously register the references, but they felt them. In other words, George Lucas told the audience a story about itself. He was creating an instant modern myth, and the world responded, rewarding the movie with record-shattering ticket sales and a cultural omnipresence that's almost unimaginable today. But something else happened as well. There's no way to quantify the effect of Star Wars, but before it, the 1970s were characterized by cynicism and gloom. Movies were dark, hope was at a minimum. In 1976, the classic film Network summed up the national sentiment with the popular cry, "I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore." But after Star Wars, somehow, things started to turn around. The darkness seemed to lift. I'm not saying this was entirely caused by Star Wars. There were many factors, but having a powerful, uplifting, deeply felt epic story, clarifying what mattered and what people aspired to, surely played a part. Since then, other movies have made more money and rivaled or surpassed Star Wars in influence. But it was the first of its kind, and it laid the foundation for everything afterward. And it may well have been the shot in the arm that ended the darkness of the decade that preceded it. Star Wars was the primal story of the modern world, just when we needed it most. The prequels completed Darth Vader's tragic arc, and by 2015, with social media fragmenting society and political unrest on the rise, the sequels were poised to tell the story of Vader's son and daughter, to bring the myth to its ultimate conclusion, potentially giving the world what it needed again. But that's not what happened. Instead of moving the story forward, the saga reset itself, replaying Empire versus Rebels, undoing the very victory that defined the original trilogy. That trilogy's heroes were sidelined, diminished, and removed altogether. The myth was broken. This is arguably far more devastating than merely disappointing the fans. As much as I feel for those who were hurt by the fates of Luke, Han, and Leia, there's something more subtle, but much deeper, that the sequels undid. The myth of the modern world was wounded. We were told a foundational story about ourselves, and before it could be completed, it was taken from us. At the start of the 21st century, we needed that myth just as much as, if not more than, we needed it at the end of the 20th. George Lucas had outlined how he'd finish the story. That version was abandoned. As the world fractured further and new Star Wars projects failed to gain traction, the refrain grew ever louder. Star Wars is dead. But I don't believe that. There's a story waiting to be told. A story its creator outlined and a world that needs it, whether it knows it or not. That's why I recently began rewriting the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Inspired by George Lucas's ideas, I've outlined episodes 7, 8, and 9, and I'm currently writing episode 7, Shadow on the Republic. The story extrapolates Lucas's sequel treatments, building on them to a conclusion that fulfills, rather than rejects, the promise of the original movies. I'm calling the project Star Wars Reborn. The episode 7 script will be released on May 25th, 2026, the 49th anniversary of the release of A New Hope. I'm completing the full trilogy, with episodes 8 and 9 to come as we approach the 50th anniversary in 2027. After half a century, I believe the myth of the modern world can be completed. And for the first time in history, independent creators may actually have the tools to bring these films to life. The world may need stories like them more than ever. Am I crazy? Probably. Will this change anything? I don't know. But if no one tries, we'll never find out. So stay tuned. The foundational story of the world around us is about to be completed the way it always should have been. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments. And if you want to see where this project goes, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. You'll hear from me again soon.